Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. It's very lovely to be able to resume this series of shiurim after quite a long break over the summer holidays and the Yom Noraim. We'll stick to our usual format, in which we'll spend half an hour or so on the Parsha, and then the second half an hour approximately on Halacha, and we'll continue with Hilchos Shabbos. As per the normal format, I've muted everyone, but please do feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question. I've also posted in the chat a link to the handout for those who haven't managed yet to download the handout. Though it's not essential, the handout is more as a resource. We're not going to look at it in too much detail, though we will learn together the psukim on which I want to focus. So if you don't have the handout, then a chumash at least would be good, but the handout is posted in the chat. Now, the segment of the parsha I wanted to look at is that of the Dor Haflaga, the generation of dispersal, as it's known, and the rather mysterious story of a group of individuals who wanted to build some sort of tower, perhaps to fight Hashem, and it seems they used to speak one language pre the events described in the Parsha, and after the Sedra, at the conclusion of the Sedra, they are punished by the conclusion of the story, they are punished by losing their unified language. Now, what's interesting is that despite the story of the Mabul being described in great length, and we know a lot about the Mabul, the parallel story of the Haflaga, the building of the tower and its destruction, is far shorter. In fact, it's really only 9 psukim. The first 9 psukim of chapter Yud Aleph, Perik Yud Aleph, the 11th chapter of Bereshis, describes the whole story. And in fact, on the source sheet, in source 2, I printed the words of the Medrash Rabbah, Rabbi Lezer Omer, Maisa Dor Hamabul Nisparish. The incident of the Dor HaMabul, the story of the Mabul, is explained, and the deeds, what they did wrong. Maisa Dor Haflaga lo nisparish, the story and the deeds of the generation of Haflaga is not explained. You know, the Medrash already acknowledges that very little is known about the story. Also, what's interesting in the story is that if we look at the chronology of events, and I've printed this in source 1, Avraham Avinu overlapped with the story of the Tower of Babel, with the Haflaga occurring. Avraham Avinu met Noach. If we look at the timeline of events, Avraham Avinu is born in 1948, 1,948 years after the creation of the world, and Noach only dies in 2006. So they have quite an overlap, and one can wonder what conversations Avraham might have had with Noach. The Torah Shmichsav doesn't tell us anything about this. The Torah Sheba'al Peh discusses it. Similarly, one can wonder about Avraham's interaction with the Dor Haflaga, and again, the Torah Shmichsav doesn't comment on this, and the Medrash speaks about this. So I just point this out as an interesting sort of historical fact that we sometimes miss, because of the way the Torah describes the chronology. And if we have time, we will get back to that point. If not, then maybe we'll be able to visit it another year, what exactly was Avram's relationship to the Dor Haflaga. But what I really want us to do is to learn the psukim of the story of the Dor Haflaga, and really set out to achieve 2 things. One is perhaps come out with a deeper understanding of a very strange episode in the Torah, and secondly, to see how Chazal read the story with greater depth than we might imagine. Now, there's 2 ways of doing this learning, and I struggled somewhat in preparing the shiur to think of the best format of how to deliver it. We could, if we had ample time, read through the first 9 psukim of the chapter, notice how sparse the information is, then look at all the chazals in the Medrashim and see what they say, and then relearn the psukim again and try and understand where on earth they're coming from. because the outline of the story as we know and love it, that perhaps we've been brought up on and been told since for many years, maybe since childhood, about everything that happened, actually when one reads the Psukim, one sees very little of it. It's very unclear in the Psukim that even the parameters of what exactly happened and what they were setting out to do is really a little more than a little unclear in the Psukim themselves. In the interest of time, though, I'm simply going to say to you, scan even just the English, which is a standard translation. It's not an entirely accurate one, and when we look at it in more detail, but really there's very little in the story itself. It opens in Pasuk Aleph with the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Is that indeed the claim, the historical claim being made, that everyone spoke one language and that the whole development of languages only took place through the Dor Haflaga? Our topic for tonight is not that of Torah and science, and I've spoken about this on other occasions, how we deal with archaeological records and historical records, and how that fits in or doesn't fit in with this Torah story. That's not my topic tonight. Nonetheless, is this indeed what the Pesukim are saying? Then it tells us they journeyed east, they found a plain, they dwelt there. They said, come, let us make brick, burn a fire, and let us build a city and make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered upon the face of the earth. So what's their plan? They've arrived, they're colonists, they're arriving, colonizing a new area, and they want to build a city, and they want to make for themselves a name. So maybe there's a bit of ego over here. They don't want to be scattered across the face of the whole earth. We don't see any terrible crime. Then, in very mysterious language that's troubled the Mefarshim ever since, Vayeret Hashem, Pasuk 5, Hashem came down to see the city and the tower which B'nai Odom, which humans have built. Interesting language, again, B'nai Odom. And Hashem says, they're one people and one language, and this is what they've begun to do, and nothing will stop them. Come, let us go down. So he goes down for a second stage and confuse their language, Pasuk Zion, so they can't understand each other's language. Pasuk 8, Hashem scatters them upon the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city, and therefore it's called Bovel, because their language was confused. So the parameters of the story are really most strange. Nothing in the story indicates to us what exactly they did wrong, other than wanting to build a city and make for themselves a name. Hashem's reaction is unclear. Is he feeling threatened by this? He says nothing will be withholden from them, therefore somehow they pose a danger. And even the use of the language, Hashem going down to have a look what's going on, all of this is more than a little difficult to understand. So what I really want us to do is learn these Pesukim again together and try and understand them in a little more detail. On the sources are printed a number of midrashim, and we'll just look very briefly at a couple of these midrashim to see what they say about the story. Source 4, fighting Hashem, a whole load of sources, midrashim that tell us about fighting Hashem, without seemingly any textual clue. We've just looked at the Pesukim, and the Pesukim tell us why they build the city. They're building the city to avoid being scattered, to make a name for themselves. And yet look what the Medrash says. Omru, they said in source 4, Medrash Tanchuma, Lo kol hemenu sheyovelo elyonim v'yitzanon atachtonim. Who does he think he is, that he's got the elyonim, the heights, and we're stuck on the tachtonim, on the lowlands? We're going to send the heaven and we're going to hit him with our axes, with our spades. So again, no midrashic source that's apparent to us, no source, for the Medrash, that's apparent for us where it sees that they want to destroy and fight Hashem. But somehow the Medrash just says this as a fact. They want to destroy and fight Hashem. Why? Because they resent that God lives on high and we live on low. Next Medrash, Medrash Rabbah, picks up on the language, Devorim Achodim. It picks up on the words. They spoke Devorim Achodim, the language that's used in the very first pasuk of the Sedra, of this section. They spoke Devorim Achodim. Devorim Achodim means single words, and the Medrash creates almost a pun. She'omru Devorim Chadim al Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. They said sharp words against the one God. Val Echad Hoy Avram Ba'oretz, and the one Avram who is unique in the land. So the word Echad means one. It also means unique. And finally, it's linked to the word chad, which is sharp. A sharp surface is one that comes to a point. A point is a singularity, a single point. And therefore, echad is linked to chadim, which is sharp. How do they attack the ones of the world? They attack Hashem, who's Hashem echad. They attack Avram, who is one. What do they say to Avram? Says the Madrash, Amr Avram, Zeh, pray to Akorahu. This Avram is a barren mule, ain't no molid. He has no, he can't bring children into the world. Again, we know it's true that Avram struggled with being barren. We know that from the later Sedras. But where does the Medrash see that they attack Avram and they attack him in this way? Again, just really no clue at all that's obvious in the Psukim. And then they attack Hashem, Hashem Elokeinu. And again, the same language, this is a Medrash Rabbah. They said, who does God think he is? That he dwells on high, that we live below. We are going to make a war against him. What do they plan to do in this Medrash? They plan to put up an idol at the top of the tower, and we're going to put a cherev, a sword, in the hands of the idol, says the Medrash, and it will somehow symbolically gesture defiance against Hashem, that we are making war against him. So these are angry people. Why are they angry? How dare Hashem live on high whilst we're stuck on planet Earth? Very, very difficult to see exactly what the Medrash is saying over here and how on earth it's deriving it from the Psukim. None of this is in the Psukim. We saw the Psukim. And then I brought a Gemara at the bottom of page 2, a Gemara in Sanhedrin, in which the Gemara says that they're split into 3 groups. Some say, let's ascend to heaven so we can live there. They just want to live on high. A similar theme between all the Midrashim. They want to ascend the heights. Another one says we want to go up there and serve Avodah Zarah. And the third one says, group says we want to go up there and fight Hashem. So this is really unifying all the Midrashim. They're not happy with their place on planet Earth. They want to build a tower to be on high. And it's very difficult to understand exactly where the Medrash is coming from in all of this. So there's a lot to talk about here. And really what I would just like to ask us all to do in the time available is to open our source sheets or our Chumashim and learn through the Parsha again. And I just want to share the comments of the Mefarshim who really open our eyes to seeing and realizing that if we read these Pasukim with care, there's actually so much more going on beneath the surface than we noticed when we just lightly skimmed through them. And the Medrash is hopefully opening our eyes to help us not miss these layers of depth. Now, otherwise, perhaps we would be, of which otherwise we would be unaware. So the Medrash here is a tool to help us notice nuance of language that otherwise we quite simply may not have seen. So let's turn again to our text. And I'm relying here on many Mefarshim, but primarily Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, who has an absolutely beautiful analysis of these Psukim, and I highly recommend anyone who has time between now and Shabbos to take out your copy of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and have a look at his very beautiful words on this particular Parsha. I'm adapting a little bit of what he says, and I'm adding some of the other Mefarshim, but a lot of the basic theme is found there, and I hope that we'll be able to draw out some further depth from that. Vayihi kol haaretz, pasuk aleph, sofa echos u'devarim achodim. So he picks up first of all on the language sofa echat, one safa, which means one. It's translated in the English I printed as one language and one speech. Safa achos, which means one set of lips, and devarim achodim, one set of words. Now there's several words in Hebrew for language. There's lashon, taken from the tongue, one organ of our mouth. Lashon is a language, is speech. There's obviously dibur, devarim achodim, one set of words. There's safa, lips, taken from another essential organ in our ability to speak. Now, safa is the lips. The root of the word really comes from safa, the border, the edge. The lips are the edge, the border of the mouth. They're the interface between the internal life generated by our minds conceptually and by our breath mechanically and physiologically in terms of the ability to speak, carved into words perhaps by the tongue, but then expressed outwardly by the safa, by the lips. So the lips are the external expression of an inner life. The Pasuk doesn't say that they speak one lashon. It doesn't say over here that they have one language, literally, or and quite possibly they have many languages or many dialects, but they have one external expression of an inner life. And this is because devarim achodim, they speak one set of words. So this is a society where their mental life, their spiritual life, their psychological life, their cultural life displays a uniformity. Devarim achodim, they speak one word. They're all interested in the same sort of thing. It's a monolithic culture. They're all interested in the same thing. They all speak about the same sort of things. They all have group think. They all think in the same way. They use the same words. And sof achas, therefore, their inner life is expressed with the same form of external life. The punchline here, which we will either get up to or not, is that Rabbi Zobin is going to argue that what we're reading about over here is really the emergence of individual identity, the emergence of an inner life, a psychological uniqueness and individuality that humans have. Now, in the West, in the 21st century, we take individuality for granted. We're all primarily individuals who choose on occasion to cooperate with each other to become part of a larger whole, whether the larger whole is a corporate identity like a company, whether it's a nation state, whether it's a kahila and a community, but we certainly see the starting point of our identity as being individual. This wasn't always the case in history, and to be honest, even to this day, there are societies which are perhaps less westernized than ours, in which it isn't quite the same thing. Perhaps there's even parts of the Hasidic world, when you speak to them, who identify more holistically with the group of which they are part than perhaps more westernized people do so, in which we see ourselves primarily as individuals who choose to identify with a group. So identity and the degree to which you feel part of a whole is not as fixed in stone as perhaps we think, and is more flexible. And that's a dynamic and an element of what's going on in this Parsha over here, already indicated by Rabbi Zobin's very first words. Now, Vayihi b'nosom mikedem, it was when they journeyed from the east, Vayimtzu bika be'eretz Shinar vayeshu. They found a valley in the land of Shinar and they dwelt there. There's a medrash which I didn't print over here, in which the medrash says they're not really journeying from the east. They're journeying mikedem. They're journeying from that which precedes the world, from God who precedes the world. And the idea behind this medrash, which sounds very medrashic and difficult to see, is that first of all, the word kedem, which means east, also means kodem, that which comes first. And there's a good reason why the same word in Lashon HaKodesh is used for east and for that which comes first, because of course the east represents the beginning of the day. The sun rises in the east. As you travel east, you move into time zones which are earlier than us. As you journey east, you're moving, the east direction represents that which precedes and comes first. There's a number of words in Lashon HaKodesh for each of the directions. We're familiar with some, less familiar with other, but they all have a reason why they're named that way. The other word for east, of course, which we're familiar with is Mizrach, because Zorach, that's where the sun shines from in the morning. So when they are Nosim Mikedem, they are not just journeying from the east, but they're also journeying from the antecedents. Now, where does the Medrash get this dual interpretation of the word kedem from? Maybe it just means they're journeying from the east. Who says there's anything about moving away from that which came first, from that which preceded? And again, there's a beautiful nuance of the language that we would miss, because normally you would expect it to say Vayisu mikedem, they journeyed from the east, Vayimtzu bika, and they found a valley. It doesn't say that. It says when they were journeying, Vayihi b'nosom mikedem, when they were journeying from the east, they found a valley. In other words, their journey from the east isn't that they're on a journey to find a valley, but their primary purpose of the journey is to journey from the east. They're trying to get away from somewhere, not get to somewhere. They call it, in geography and in demographic studies, they call it push factors, not pull factors. They want to get out from where they are. They want to get away from the previous life. So what are they? They're a group of people who want to leave everything old behind. They are leaving because they just want to reject where they currently are, the old, not because they have a specific purpose of trying to get to somewhere new. So the Medrash is picking up this nuance of the language, that they wish to move away from the pre-established order of society, the preconceptions of society. Pasuk base. Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer ishal re'ehu, each one says to their fellow, Hava milbana leveinim, v'nisra folisreifa. Let us burn bricks and make them into a fire. V'tihi lanu haleveina le'even, and the bricks will be for us as a stone. V'chema hoya lahem lechomer, and the mortar would be for them as clay. Now, first of all, the language hava is interesting language. Come, let us make. Hava, come, let us do this. The literal meaning of the word hava is not come, right? It's not bar with an aleph. It's not come. Hava means to give of yourself. The word yohav in Aramaic perhaps Aramaic is a cognate language of Hebrew. In Aramaic, yohav means to give. Hava means give of yourself. In other words, make something of ourselves, give up of ourselves. It's a very immersive and embracing and general, inclusive call for action. It's not just come and do something, it's give of yourself, dedicate yourself to a particular mission. And we will see that the word hover is a word that runs as a running refrain throughout this text. If we look in Pasuk Base, in Pasuk Gimel, we just heard the word hover. In Pasuk Daled, again they say the word hover. This isn't normal use of language. We don't find hover used the whole time throughout the whole Torah. Interestingly, when Hashem says he's going to go down and inspect what they're doing, in Pasuk Zion, in Pasuk 7, he uses the same words, hover. Come, let us give of ourselves to inspect what's going on. In other words, there's a deliberate playing of language over here, in which they say hover, and Hashem responds with a hover. So this isn't an insignificant use of language when we find 3 times in 9 Pesukim the same word used, twice by them, and once by Hashem in response to their call. So hover is a call, it's a clarion cry. Give of yourself. This is a significant involvement in a project. Now, there's a second point going on over here which we often miss. And we miss it because we're not builders and we're not used to understanding how building works. Why do they want to settle in this valley? What appeals to them in this valley? And the answer is, what do they want to do in this valley? They want to make bricks. Why do they need to make bricks? Because they don't have stones. A brick is a substitute for a stone. The easiest place to settle is where you have stones, and you can build buildings using stones. But they don't have stones over here. And therefore they say, let us make bricks to be as our stones. That's what a brick is. A brick is a manufactured stone. You take together clay and you bake it in the kiln and you make something which acts like a stone. So normally speaking, going to an area where there are no stones is a disadvantage. You make bricks when you run out of stones. In all old buildings you see, they didn't bother making bricks because they still had stones. You run out of stones, then you begin using bricks. But these are people who want bricks. They don't want stones. In other words, their purpose isn't the result. It's the engagement with the process that they want. They want to maximize self-expression. They don't want to use a place where there's stones. They want it to be man-made. They want it to be manufactured by us. However, we're giving of ourselves completely. This is a self-expression that we're finding over here. We're not going to rely on the natural resources. We are going to be independent. We're going to make bricks ourselves. There's another paradox or irony over here in which they deliberately settle in a bikkah, in a plain, in a valley, in lowlands. What do they then want to do? They want to build a migdal, a tower. Well, if you want to reach the heavens, surely the best place to start off is building on a hill or a mountain. But this isn't the way they think. They're not interested in the result. Their aim is, if they're there to fight something, and the Medrash is picking up on over here, these are fighters. They're angry with God. They say, who are you to be on high and us to be on low? We're going to ascend to the heights, and we're going to get there through our own efforts. We're not going to use the natural resources of a God-given world of stones. We're not going to build this on a mountain. We're going to defy you, and we're going to get there by getting there through our own hard work, through our own effort. So we're already picking up the language of what's going on over here in the Midrashic reading. Pasuk Daled, Vayomru Hover, Nivlan Onu Ir, again the same language of Hover. This is give ourselves of all in our project to master nature. And then there's interesting continuity of language. Let's carry on with the language of the Pasuk. Hover Nivlan Onu Ir, we're going to build a city. Or Migdal V'Roshoi B'Shamayim. And it's a tower where its head is in the heaven. The Nasa Lonu Shem, and we will make a name for ourselves. Penofot al Pnei Ha'adama. Nasa Lonu Shem, we're going to make a name for ourselves. A name called by who? This is everyone involved in this project. This is a whole society. Who are you interested in making yourself a name vis-a-vis? And the answer to the question is either something external to ourselves, God, or the individuals within society itself, or perhaps the future descendants, future people who are going to be on earth. So these are people who are interested in making a name for themselves. By the way, the method they choose for making the name is a little sinister. And look at the nuance of language again, which the Medrash picks up on in the previous pasuk, in Pasuk Gimel. V'nisrafa l'sreifa. We are going to burn it as a burning. They don't actually say what the object, the use of language, nisra for the sreifa, doesn't have an object in the construction, will burn it for a burning. Whatever will be burnt will burn. Again, it's this hover idea. We'll consume whatever we need to take up. We're going to consume and burn in this process. We don't care what price we'll pay. What's going to be eaten up in this process. And these are people who are interested in making themselves a name. We already mentioned that Avraham Avinu is around in the world at this time, and there's a language used about Avraham Avinu's projects consistently throughout his life. What's the language used throughout the life of Avraham? Vayikra b'shem Hashem. He calls in the name of Hashem. So Avraham's also interested in calling out a name, but in Avraham's case, it's a calling out in the name of Hashem. In their case, it's calling out in their own name. And we see again that the Medrash contrast with the vision of Avram. Avram is a preda, they say. He's a mule. He has no continuity. He's not going anywhere. There's nowhere for it to go. We're going to go somewhere because we're building for ourselves a name. They're coming here to answer the eternal struggle of mankind. And this really gets to the depth of why the Medrash is seeing over here a tension, a fight against Hashem and an anger against Hashem for existing in the Elyonim. The Elyonim are the heights on high, the heavens. The heavens are the seats of absolute meaning and absolute value and eternal existence. And these are people who are resentful of their mortality as human beings. They want to freeze time. Why should Hashem exist on high whilst we're stuck down below in this ever-changing world? And this is really the paradox at the heart of all human existence. We humans have an aspect of ourselves which is infinite, which is eternal. We want to touch meaning and purpose. We know that we have minds that can span the universe, that can reach the stars. We know that there are values that we appreciate, which seem to us eternal, chesed, givingness, love, and meaning. And yet we're stuck in our finite bodies. We're stuck in a world in which we labor and toil with little time to really dedicate to that which we want to achieve. And we are but a passing shadow. By the way, a reference to the passing shadow, a withering flower, which we say on Rosh Hashanah, K'tzitz Novel, is of course the language that Hashem uses about them in Pasuk Zayin and Pasuk 7, Hava Nerdov and Nevola Shom Safasom, which doesn't mean, as it's often translated, we will mix up their language. That's Bolal in Pasuk 9. Nevola Shom will dry them up, they will wither. These are people seeking immortality, which is the start of the quest of all religion. The drive for all spirituality is driven by the part of ourselves within ourselves which craves immortality, which craves eternity, which tells us that even though superficially we are but a passing shadow, there's something real we can achieve. We can touch infinity, we can touch eternity. However, if we channel it in the direction that they see, in which the way to fulfill our drive for eternity is by defying the world, by building bricks, by building towers and flat places. In other words, achieve immortality by creating everlasting structures, that is a destruction of the possibility of what it means to be a human being. That's contradicting the essence of what a meaningful spiritual life is. And we see here already emerging this midrashic theme of what's going on with people who resent their place in life. They resent that they are betachtonim, that they are part of the mortal world in which we come and we go, and they want to be gods. They want to exist in the world of eternity. And the Torah doesn't argue with that objective. Avram also calls Vayikra b'shem Hashem. The Torah simply argues that the way to achieve this eternity is to transcend our physicality rather than immerse itself with a kriyas shem, with this glory of fame which they're trying to seek. And there's something sinister in the process in which they're doing it, because it's one in which they are willing to consume and eat anything up in the process. V'roshoi b'shamayim. The head of this building is going to be b'shamayim. Interestingly, it doesn't say v'rosho like with Yaakov Avinu, shamayma, or it's going to lashamayim. Its head is going to be Bashamayim. It's not a tower designed to reach to the heavens, it's a tower to reach in the heavens, to allow us to exist in the heavens, to live in the heavens, hence the midrashic understanding that this is a project of seeking permanence, of seeking heavenly life, rather than the mere passage of time. Please God, this is a parsha that we will revisit and learn, and in Hashem next year we will be able to continue and learn it. We have run out of our allocated half hour, but I hope even just looking at this first section of the parsha shows us a little bit of insight as to what's going on and to why the Medrash sees in this project of theirs, something which is truly frightening, something which is powered by the most noble force a human has, the drive for eternity, for achieving something, and yet scarily wishes to channel that energy into something which negates the essence of the mission of Avram. Hence the Midrashic comments of the conversation taking place between Avram and the builders of the tower. Where Midrashim come from and their source for particular information is really a subject in its own right. Is the Midrash here recording an oral tradition in which this conversation took place between Avram and the people building the tower? We don't know. But is the Midrash building a conceptual conversation? It's telling us that this is, whether physically said or not, this is the battle between an Avram and a member of the Dor Haflaga. That certainly is the case. Are you vayikra b'shem Hashem, or are you calling out in your own name in trying to achieve this? So we'll stop the Parsha section here. Though please, in Mitzvah Hashem, we will find a chance to continue this on another occasion, and we'll shift to our halachic discussion for the second half an hour. Before I start that, though, are there any, if anyone wants to comment at all on the Parsha? Otherwise, we'll go straight into the halacha section.
Could I ask you a question, Rabbi Zobin?
Please do.
It's fascinating what you're saying, and what comes to my mind is also the idea of a metaphor between a child and a parent pushing to, the love-hate relationship, and pushing to find your limits and your boundaries. And I just feel that there's some sort of synergy there for me between Am Yisrael and the Almighty, and pushing boundaries.
Yes, I think this is absolutely right. We will, over the rest of Sefer Bereshis, revisit these ideas actually again and again, and this is why I'm okay stopping here halfway through the discussion of the Dor Haflaga, because a lot of Bereshis is the study of humanity in its infancy, and a lot of the discussion going on is the analogy to parent-child is spot on. It's to human beings struggling with what their place in the world is, what it means to have identity and self-identity, and how we can express the independence with which we have been gifted by God, and yet not use that to defy him. We've been created, B'Tselem Elokim, as little gods, in the image of God, with the gift of Bechira and free will, and yet paradoxically we have to use our sense of independence, which is that at the heart of what it means to be a human being, to recognize our place in the world, and not to be that defiant teen who says, you know what, I'm going to do something silly and stupid just because it's not what I've been told to do, or that toddler stamping its foot in the terrible twos because it discovers its sense of independence, and I'm going to say no just because I'm able to say no. And certainly this is a large part of the discussion around Bereshis and Odom and Hissin, and a theme that really runs through much of Sefer Bereshis: boundaries, self-control, and the like. Okay, so this draws out for this week our Parsha discussion to a close, though I will try and continue it. I'm a little tempted actually to say that we'll continue this theme next week, even though next week is Parshat Noach, because it ties so closely into understanding of Avram mission. So maybe rather than leaving a year's gap, we'll revisit this next week. For now, I want to move on to the halachic part of the discussion, and we were working our way through the halachas of Shabbos. In the last term, before the summer break, we learned the halachas of kosev, writing. We're not going to revisit that. The recordings are available. We're now going to learn the next melacha on the list, and this is the melacha of Mochek, or erasing. And I will simply start by saying that as when we learnt kosev, writing on Shabbos, one's first thought, why on earth should we learn these halachas? Well, of course, it's very simple. We don't write on Shabbos. I mean, who would dream of writing on Shabbos? None of us are going to write on Shabbos. So why do we need to learn the halachas of writing in depth? We're not going to write on Shabbos. Of course we're not. And therefore, similarly, one can have that sense with Mochek. Look, we're not going to erase writing on Shabbos. Why on earth do we need to learn the halachas of writing on Shabbos? Isn't something that any of us would dream of doing. And we will see as we learn this that there are many scenarios which indeed Mochek, erasing on Shabbos, become applicable. I'll mention simply as a teaser one of the very common halachic discussions, which is that of eating cakes and biscuits which have images drawn on them. It's become ever more common to have maybe at simchas to have biscuits given out in which a photo perhaps of the the couple or the bar mitzvah boy or the bar mitzvah girl is drawn onto the photo. This is just one example of where Mochek might indeed become relevant on Shabbos, but there are many other such examples, and therefore it's important for us to learn this. Now, when we looked at Kosev, the Malacha of Kosev, which is the twin of Mochek, it's the flip side in a sense, the Malacha of Mochek, of Kosev, was different to that of Soveya, dyeing, colouring. When you colour a cloth, the ink that you're putting on the fabric is there to serve the cloth, to colour it, to beautify it, to colour it, to give it a colour. When you write, the value of what you are writing, whether it's a letter or a symbol or a number or a picture, as we discussed with Kosev, is the information it contains. And therefore, Mochek, one aspect of Mochek, is erasing and removing information. This is also a type of creative activity on Shabbos. In the same way as increasing information in the world, writing, wording, or numbering, or a picture, a symbol that conveys information, is Kosev. Deleting and removing it is also a change, a significant change in the world. Now, it may be a non-creative act, it may be an act of pure destruction, or it may have a creative element to it. For example, erasing a piece of information that you don't want someone to know or you don't want to exist, or an IOU debt, for example. There's something achieved in altering the world through erasing the information Mochek. So this is one example of the constructive act of Mochek. A second example of the constructive act of Mochek is where you are erasing something in order to get a blank surface, a blank piece of paper, in order to write something else on it. So this is a second example of a constructive act of Mochek. There could be completely destructive examples of erasing, where you're just destroying something with no interest either in producing a new surface, nor an interest in changing the world such that this information doesn't exist. In such a scenario, this would not be the Torah prohibition of Mochek, it would be a rabbinic prohibition of Mochek. Why would it be rabbinically prohibited? Because it's very similar to Mochek, and therefore we need to take it seriously. Nonetheless, all malachas are creative activities. Creating writing is a creative activity of kosev, lichtov, to write. Erasing writing, either because the information, the world is a richer place without having this information, or because I've created a new surface. This is the malacha, the creative activity of Mochek. Now, the nafkamina, the difference between these two scenarios of Mochek, is that the second one, when I am clearing a surface, would even be a malacha when I'm erasing and not writing, but just a mark on a piece of paper to clear the surface. The first malacha, the first definition of Mochek, is when it's to do with writing. It's the twin sister of kosev. I write information, lichtov, kotev. I'm writing information, a symbol, that's the malacha of writing. Deleting a symbol that carries information, that's the malacha of Mochek. And the second scenario is related to kosev because I'm preparing a surface for writing by clearing it or something on it. What am I clearing off it? It may be lettering, if I want to erase something written, rub out something in a pencil in order to write something else there. Or it may merely be cleaning off an ink spillage on paper or something of the sort, which would also be the malacha of Mochek because I'm preparing a surface for writing. So these are the two scenarios of Mochek. Now let's apply this maybe today, in the time we have available, to the first scenario that I mentioned, which is that of eating foods which contain writing on them. Now the Ramah, the most senior Ashkenazi posek, the co-author of the Shulchan Aruch, whose psak has been adopted by the Ashkenazi world, is concerned about this issue of writing on, of erasing letterings on Shabbos when the lettering is written on a piece of food. So it's something we need to take seriously because this is a concern raised by the Ramah. Now, interestingly, and I've been asked on occasion to speak about Darkei HaPasak, the rules of Pasak. One of the most commonly known rules of Pasak is that Ashkenazim follow the Ramah and Sfardim follow Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch. Now, both halves of these rules are a little simplistic. It is true to say that the Ramah is the most weighty single posek in the Ashkenazi world by and large. Nonetheless, sometimes there is a weight of opinion against the Ramah, an accumulated mess of later authorities and earlier authorities who question his Pesach, and in such cases, occasionally the Ramah will be overruled, and this is indeed such a scenario to a degree. And therefore, whilst the Ramah is very concerned with writing on a biscuit or a cake, in practice, in many situations, the poskim are much less concerned about this than one may take it from the language of the Ramah. Now, is it that the Ramah is being overruled, or is it that the Ramah only meant in a certain very specific case, but would agree that in many general cases this isn't a concern? It remains a little unclear based on the language of the Ramah. Nonetheless, in general, this is less of a concern than one might think. But let's just analyze the situation. What is going on over here, and what is the problem? Now, the first point to mention is that seemingly the main concern would be when one has lettering on a surface, meaning to say that if one has, for example, a cake and one has dribbled along the cake in icing, "Happy birthday, Yankee," and that's what one has dribbled across the cake, there one has a potential scenario of Mochek, because one has writing which one is erasing off the surface of the cake, thus clearing the surface for something else to be written there, in theory, in principle. If, however, the body of the food forms the lettering itself, such as on these, I think these nice biscuits they have, where there's lettering etched on it, or awesome biscuits, many awesome crackers have lettering etched on it, and so on. In this situation, you don't have writing on the food, but you have the food shaped into writing or etched into writing. And here there are two things to consider. First of all, even in the Malacha of Kosev is forming a shape. The Malacha, classically we think of writing as putting lettering or ink onto a surface. In this case over here, it's not that you're putting it onto a surface, you've shaped it onto a surface. And this is one dispute. Now, when it comes to writing, we certainly are stringent. One cannot shape things into lettering. However, this is one lack of clarity over here when we're talking about food which is shaped. The second thing is, what actually would be the malacha that I'm doing? I'm erasing lettering, but I'm not clearing a surface, because it's the body of the food which is itself shaped into the lettering, number one. Number two, I have no interest in removing this information from the world. This isn't a IOU or a miswritten check where I want to destroy the information. I'm simply a makalkel. I simply want to destroy it because I want to eat in the process of so doing. So this is the first distinction that is drawn by the poskim, which is this in the body of it, or is this written onto the surface of it? And this is the first point. Now, if it is written on the surface of it, what exactly would be prohibited? And the answer is, at most, breaking the letter itself into pieces, where you're cutting into the letter itself. If you're cutting between letters, then you are merely separating between letters, which wouldn't seem to be a problem in the Malach of Kosev. And the reason it's not a problem is because when it comes to writing, joining letters isn't a prohibition, and therefore seemingly separating letters isn't a prohibition. It is true that two letters in combination may say something. H-A-P-P-Y says happy, whereas the letter H by itself and the letter A and the letter P and so on don't. But the Malach of Kosev isn't merely joining letters, but is creating letters. And therefore, whilst cutting through letters may be a problem, dividing and separating letters isn't. Many of the cakes, by the way, that one sees on the market have script letters in the way it's formed. The font they use for forming the text is script letters. But script letters are merely separate letters that touch. You're allowed to separate between two script letters. The point isn't whether the letters join or not. The point is, if they're separate letters and I'm merely cutting between letters, then this isn't an issue. So if one has a cake where the letters are written on the surface of the cake rather than built out of the surface of the cake or out of the icing on the cake, then best practice is indeed to avoid cutting through the letters, but to cut round the letters, in which case this would be separating letters rather than destroying letters, and therefore the malacha of Mochek again wouldn't apply. Alternatively, if these letters are separated before Shabbos, again, this wouldn't be a problem because they are merely letters sitting, or even the pieces of the letter, sitting next to each other rather than together. And we discussed playing Scrabble and other cases when we learned Kosov, whether one's allowed to, if pieces are already separate and just adjacent to each other, whether there's a problem at all. Finally, if it's a scenario where you bite into it as opposed to cutting into it, again, this wouldn't be a problem. And the reason is because of a combination of leniencies over here. As we already discussed, it's not clear-cut that there should be a problem at all. What's really going on over here is merely a destruction of lettering where there's no surface that's being produced. You're not clearing a surface for writing. You're not interested in the destruction of lettering that's going on. It's makalkel, it's a destructive act, therefore. It's done kilachayad. It's not done in the normal manner of erasing letters, but rather done through a biting and eating process. And therefore, it's not at all clear that, and therefore the consensus of poskim is that with this combination of leniencies, it's incidental to what I'm doing. I don't have an intention to destroy the lettering of the picture. I merely wish to eat the food that's being served. Therefore, this wouldn't be a problem on Shabbos. It wouldn't be a problem to eat this. Where would you maybe have a concern? This would be where there's literally letters pinned to a cake. I haven't seen this for years. This is almost a childhood memory. But I remember they used to have plastic lettering, which one used to stick into cake. Does anyone remember this? Used to have plastic lettering, sticking into cake, let's say spelling out with the letters HAPP, etc., happy birthday or something like that. And they were stuck onto the cake. Now this is more analogous to Kosov, because here you have lettering which isn't food, it's its own lettering, stuck onto a surface, and I'm removing the lettering from the surface in order to be able to eat the cake. And this maybe would be the malacha of Mochek. The poskim discuss this. It seems in many old shuls, the paroches in the shul, the curtain that covers the Aron HaKodesh, used to have lettering stuck to it and pinned to it. And the poskim discuss whether one can remove or add this lettering on Shabbos. Either it's because the lettering used to fall off, or they used it a bit analogously to our notice boards in shul, where maybe they would stick up the letters Yalev, Yavo, or something if it was Rosh Chodesh, and that's how they would remind people of what was going on. And there the poskim say this would be a problem, because if we think of writing as attaching ink to the surface, then attaching lettering to a surface and removing it would be the malacha of Mochek and Kosov, and therefore would be a problem of obliterating things on Shabbat. So just to summarize, the halachic consensus remains one of compromise. Many poskim are skeptical about whether the whole concept of Mochek applies to food and eating food at all. Nonetheless, the stature of the Ramah is such that if you have all the problematic conditions fulfilled, we are machmir, we are forbid this, but otherwise we are lenient. So if this is lettering on it rather than out of the body of the cake or out of the body of the icing, number one. Number two, it hasn't been separated before Shabbos. Number three, I'm separating into the letter itself rather than separating between letters. Then I shouldn't do so with an act of cutting or the like, though I can still bite into it and that wouldn't be a concern, but I wouldn't be allowed to cut it and separate it with a knife. And even that, to be honest, is a little bit of a stringency. We avoid it, but if you are to function and you see that people are unaware of this halacha, one doesn't need to point out to them that this is a concern. But for those of us who are gathered here and learning Hilchos Shabbos, one should avoid separating, erasing lettering when it's on the surface, dribbled on like an icing, and when I'm cutting it, not biting into it, and when I'm cutting the letters themselves rather than between the letters. So this is a summary of the practical halachas of Mochek applied to the scenario of eating a cake. The poskim discuss another scenario, which is also not such a common case, perhaps nowadays, which is when on the side of a book I have lettering. I think we discussed this when we spoke about writing also, opening and closing a book, where through so doing I form a picture or letters. Now many Sepharim have a pattern, like a ripple pattern or something of the sorts, on the side of a book. This is no concern. A pattern doesn't convey information. It's simply a pattern. It's decorative, and that isn't a problem. When we spoke about eating cake, which has pictures or a photo, for example, or words written on it, we weren't talking about when it merely has a decorative pattern. Talking about where it has a symbol which carries information. A flower, a word, a number is a symbol that carries information. If it's merely a fancy shape or the like, this doesn't carry information. This is removed from the world of kosev and mochek, and therefore wouldn't be a problem at all. However, if on the sides of the book you literally have lettering and words, then would this be an issue of mochek and kosev? And I still remember old libraries where they used to do this. Instead of having a sticker on the spine of the book with the code or whatever, they sometimes used to write coding on the leaves of the book, so that if you looked at all the pages gathered together, you would see lettering written there, and as you separate them, you're breaking up the letter. And the question is, are you allowed to open or close such a book? Again, just applying the halachic principles we have learned, it would appear that the core halacha is that this is perfectly mutter. Why would one think it's mutter? This is temporary, and we discussed temporary versus permanent previously. Now, it is true that if you left the book there, it would last like that without opening and closed. However, it is designed to be opened and closed like a door. It would appear to be analogous to asking, how can I open and close the door on Shabbos? Surely this is an act of building. And the answer is no. The door is designed to be open and closed. That's how one uses it. It's a use as opposed to creating something new. In addition, I have absolutely no intention to erase the lettering. So this is a side consequence. It is true that normally a definite side consequence we worry about, but here in combination with the fact that this is made to be open and closed, it would appear that this shouldn't be a problem. In addition, if you think about it, I'm not really creating the letter. I'm merely joining up lots of little pieces to produce the letter. And this gets down to a question about what exactly is the act of writing. If I have a mosaic in which I put lots of pieces together to form a letter, is this an act of writing or not? And the apparent answer would appear to be this is not an act of writing, and therefore you would think this is not a problem. And therefore the core pasuk is that this is allowed. Nonetheless, the Mishnah Berurah says if one has an alternative book available which doesn't produce lettering through so doing, this should be this is better, because the weight of one particular posek, the Levush, who is concerned about this, even though the other poskim aren't. The final scenario we'll look at in the few minutes left to us today is a very common one, and this is really halacha l'maisa, and this is the issue of opening packaging on Shabbos. Now, there's much to talk about in terms of opening packaging and bottle tops and tin cans and all sorts of other scenarios. I'm not going to discuss all of them today because many of them involve a different malacha, the malacha of boina and soisa, building and destroying. Building and destroying doesn't just mean buildings like the Tower of Babel that we were discussing before. It also means utensils, perhaps. And that's a separate issue, that's of opening and closing things in that terms. There's also the issue of makeh b'patish, completing utensil. That's not my discussion today. I'm simply focusing on one issue, which is when I open packaging, if I'm tearing lettering, is this a concern or not? And once again, if we analyze it, it would appear we would think that this is not or should not be a problem. Why should it not be a problem? It's an act of destruction. I'm destroying the letters. Malacha means creative activity. Nonetheless, destruction is forbidden drabonon, absolutely. However, in combination with it being an act of destruction, it's also an unintended side consequence. It's a definite side consequence. A definite side consequence we are stringent for on Shabbos, but it's an unintended side consequence combined with an issa drabonon in this case. And therefore, the combination of these two factors together, combined with the fact that it is kil'acha yad, it's not the normal way of erasing. I'm not cleaning a surface in order to erase something, and it's therefore not derech mechika. It's not the way this melacha is normally done. Should combine to make this mutter. Nonetheless, there is a very long-standing Ashkenazi practice to be stringent in this respect, and therefore for Ashkenazim we are machmir l'chatchila to try and avoid tearing the lettering when we open. Nonetheless, if in the process of opening the package and taking due care and diligence not to tear the lettering, accidentally a letter gets torn, this is not a concern. So sometimes you have a chocolate bar with a peel, which is very, very hard to tear without tearing the letter. And therefore the pasuk is one should make an attempt to tear the lettering without, and do one's best, an attempt to tear it and do one's best to avoid tearing the lettering. Nonetheless, if it did get torn, or if there's no way to open it, and as much as care as one takes, there's a chance that accidentally one will end up tearing the paper. This isn't a problem on Shabbos. Let's just use the couple of minutes left to us to discuss one or two more examples, and then hopefully that will allow us to finish this set of halachas today. One more example I'll mention. When we talk about erasing, what actually do we mean by mochek? Now, the simplest example of mochek is a rubber in which you rub out a pencil. That's classic mochek. I'm deleting and I'm erasing something. What about Tipex, for example? Is this the malacha of mochek, when I'm painting over something with a white paint? And the answer is that this is not a new invention. Tipex perhaps didn't exist several hundred years ago when the postscript discussed this, but the idea of using white ink or other ink to erase something, of course, did. And something which binds strongly to the fabric of the paper or the surface in which I've used my writing would be considered erasing also. If I merely lie something on top of it, that's covering, that's not erasing. However, if it binds to it and becomes part of one unit, this is also the malacha of mochek, because I'm erasing. Here we come to a very fascinating example. Sometimes you might have, let's say, a Zemiris book which got wet, and as a result of it getting wet, paper is a organic fabric, and it's produced actually through wetting it. And when the paper gets very wet, the pages don't merely stick together, but they almost merge into one paper, such that when you try and separate them, the only way of doing it is very slightly tearing into the fabric of the paper. Now, if the paper is merely stuck a little bit along the edges, there's no problem with opening the stuck page on Shabbos, not an issue at all. However, if the paper is literally soaked to a degree where it's become very tightly bound, almost one piece of paper, if I now separate the paper on Shabbos, revealing the writing underneath, I've done the malacha of mochek, erasing, not the malacha of kosev. I haven't written anything because the writing was there. However, I've produced a surface for writing to exist. It happens to be that the writing is already there, it's already printed. But I have produced the surface of the writing by separating this paper and separating these two pieces of paper. And therefore, if one has paper which is so stuck that it's almost become one wouldn't be allowed to separate this on Shabbos because of the malacha of mochek. Merely stuck a little bit, not an issue, no problem in separating the paper, but stuck completely bound into one new sheet, by separating it would be a problem of mochek. One final example of mochek is writing on human skin. I'm not talking about a tattoo, which is a different halachic issue and non-erasable. I'm talking about if someone writes on their own skin. In fact, twice I've had a question about this. The first time I was asked this was someone who literally had a habit of writing notes on their skin. If they needed to remind themselves of something, they would jot it down. If they didn't have a piece of paper handy, they would jot it down on their skin. The other time I had this was in someone had visited a theme park and had stamped on their on the skin a stamp to say that they were allowed admission to this particular activity or something like that. This was in Israel, actually, this story, and I don't know if they do that in theme parks here. And they had gone on Chol HaMoed on Erev Yom Tov, and they discovered the child still had this rather unsightly stamp on the hand on Yom Tov itself. Yom Tov in this respect is the same as Shabbos. This isn't one of the malachas which are allowed on Yom Tov, and for all intents and purposes, this is the identical question. And the shaila is one allowed to deliberately wash it off one's skin on Shabbos? You're allowed to wash your hands on Shabbos for cleanliness or hygiene. This is no malacha whatsoever. But are you allowed to deliberately erase the writing on the skin? And the answer is no, believe it or not. Skin with writing on, if I wish to erase the writing, I'm deliberately being mochek. It may even be a constructive act. I wish to erase the writing because I don't want it there and it bothers me and so on. This would be mochek, malacha of mochek. I'm allowed to wash my hands normally for hygiene or for Nesilas Yadayim or for Negel Vasa, and if the writing gets erased by itself, this is a unintended side consequence. It's not inevitable. Any act of washing won't necessarily wash it away. It's the whole point of this sort of dye that's used for these things is that it's not permanent, but it resists a little bit of water, and therefore I'd be allowed to wash my hands just for general hygiene or for Netilas Yadayim or Negel Vasa, but I wouldn't be allowed to deliberately scrub off this writing on Shabbos. So this is a summary of the Malach of Mochek with some scenarios mentioned, and in Mitzvah Hashem next week we will continue the Parsha shiur and start a new Malacha for Shabbos. That's a swift tour through the Malacha of Mochek, which completes what we had started last time, which was the Malacha of Kosev. And I'll stop there and wish everyone a good evening.